What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Man, let me tell you something, man. It's been a little while since I got this excited about a story. Green Lantern Blackest Night, God in heaven. Okay, so for those of you guys who are just catching up with us, the long and short of it is that you got all these lantern cores that all tie into the emotional spectrum. We'll get through all that stuff as we go through this story. There's another lantern core called the Black Lanterns, and it's basically just black rings showing up seemingly out of nowhere and then resurrecting all these dead heroes. That's the long and short of what we've covered so far. Now, the cool thing about this is that all the heads of the lantern cores, which is to say the individuals who are basically either the leaders of the cores or considered to be the most powerful of the cores, have all banded together for the purpose of preventing this war of light. The way the prophecy of Blackest Night played out in the Green Lantern mythos is that there was this idea that these 7 lantern cores, all these lantern cores were going to rise, and they were just going to go to war against each other for whatever reason. But while they were waging war, the Black Lanterns would show up with their rings. They would start resurrecting all these dead heroes. And so while the lanterns were paying attention to what was going on, all these dead heroes would just start spreading throughout the entirety of the universe, and then the entire emotional spectrum would be obliterated, the lantern cores would be destroyed, and the universe would just go into this age of darkness. That's the prophecy of the Black Lanterns. So all these lantern cores showing up, they're all basically banding together to say, okay, let's face off against these Black Lanterns. Now here's the cool thing. If this story was written in Marvel, it would just be this massive universal crossover like Annihilation. DC is not that way. DC does not have this huge universal wide pantheon of different things. They basically have the Green Lanterns, whatever race they happen to come across, and then that's basically it. But DC's universal pantheon is nowhere near as huge and developed as Marvel is. And so one thing to keep in mind is that these Black Lanterns spreading throughout the universe, we just kind of left to assume they're spreading to other planets all throughout the cosmos, but a bulk of the conflict is following whatever Green Lantern Corps members are in space, and then Earth. Earth is where the biggest brunt of that stuff happens. Now the whole idea is that every single member of the Lantern Corps, I guess every part of the emotional spectrum, which is to say all the Lantern Corps have an entity. Necron is the emotional aspect of death, if death could be an emotion. The whole idea here is that when it came to the various superheroes who have died over the years, one of the big questions people had is, if these superheroes have died, how are they alive now? Well, the great thing about this is that Jeff Johns comes along and he says, okay, none of these superheroes actually died. And this conversation, this whole, taunting by William Hand and Necron and so on, what we end up learning is that Barry Allen was supposed to have died. During the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, when he broke down on the molecular level, he was supposed to go to the afterlife. He was supposed to be dead. Necron got in their way and stopped them from dying and sent them back, and that's how they lived. Now, the other half of this is, remember, the only real spacefaring force that's capable of dealing with these Black Lanterns is the Green Lantern Corps, and like we covered in previous videos, they're dealing with the Black Lanterns off in space, and so it's basically just the Earth's superheroes. So we have the Teen Titans and the Justice League and all these different superhero groups that come together to try to face off against Necron and all these Black Lanterns. Remember, this is almost like a losing war, right? These guys, it's a stopgap measure. That's all it is. It's them jumping in and trying to destroy these Black Lantern rings. Because remember, the only way a Black Lantern ring can truly be destroyed is if a massive amount of light from multiple sources is basically just thrown at these Black Lantern rings. And so you'd have to have somebody like Dr. Light who can manipulate light. You'd have to have multiple cores coming together and firing all their rings at the same time and channeling those energies in order to destroy them. And the whole idea of channeling their energies comes to bear for the various leaders of the Lantern Corps to basically put their energies together into the Black Lantern Central Power Battery. Remember, the Black Lantern Central Power Battery, like all the other Central Power Batteries, is basically where the Black Lanterns get their power from. And so the whole idea is, if they destroy the Central Power Battery, it'll do 2 things. The first is it'll basically deactivate all the Black Lantern rings, and the second is it'll send Necron back to his own realm, to wherever it was that he came from. The problem is it doesn't work because it's so much power and so much energy, it's almost impossible to do. And so what ends up happening here, and probably one of the greatest moments in the history of comics, these rings start flying out. One of them says, Bruce Wayne of Earth, rise. So Bruce Wayne, Bruce Wayne's dead, and ends up coming back. And it's one of the coolest things. Now remember, this is not really Bruce Wayne. It's not really the essence of Bruce Wayne, the spirit of Bruce Wayne. It's his body. It's basically the Black Lantern rings reconstituting Bruce Wayne's body and then using it as a vector. But when it comes to Bruce Wayne, he is probably one of the single most important characters in all of the DC landscape for a bunch of different reasons. One of the first reasons reasons is because of the fact that everyone is tethered to him, and that's why he was brought back. But the whole idea is that whether they trust him, whether they don't trust him, whether they love him, whether they hate him, everybody in some form or fashion is connected emotionally to Bruce Wayne. And so because of this, using this emotional tether of Bruce Wayne, in the shock of the moment, all of these guys are basically bonded with Black Lantern rings, and we end up with the Black Lantern Justice League. The only exception to this is Hal Jordan and Barry Allen. At this point, we switch over to John Stewart. Now, John Stewart is one of those Green Lanterns where he basically achieved the height of his popularity during the Justice League cartoon show. He predates that show by like 30 years, but he was just one of those Green Lanterns out there. And in the end, despite the fact that he was introduced back then, despite the fact that he was amazing, it didn't much matter because the Green Lantern titles weren't selling anyway. But with the Justice League cartoon show, he was the only Green Lantern on that show. And so it was a way to just bolster him up, say, hey, you want a Green Lantern? You get John Stewart and nobody else. But in this instance, one of the things to remember, and one of the things we talked about before, was John Stewart in his younger days. John Stewart was a member of the Marines, and then eventually he became a Green Lantern. But when he first became a Green Lantern, he was headstrong, he was arrogant. This came to bear with a planet called Xanchi. This was basically a planet that was part of this really weird storyline, but the idea is that there was a bomb in the middle of the planet, and instead of basically keeping it safe, instead of keeping the bomb from detonating, John Stewart flew in and tried to basically defuse it. The result was that the bomb went off, killed the planet, and killed everybody on it. This has weighed on John Stewart's mind ever since. And that's the cool thing about this. It's always been a background of his character. And so him being here, he's the only one on this Black Lantern version of Xanchi, this planet that was reconstituted by the Black Lantern rings alongside everybody who was killed. But the cool thing about this is John Stewart is not a guy to be trifled with. John Stewart is an absolute beast. He literally just starts creating machine gun constructs, and he unleashes holy hell on every single one of these Black Lanterns. It is pretty amazing. But ultimately, John Stewart also recognizes that if he were to continue fighting this battle on his own, he would assuredly die. And if he's taken down by one of the Black Lanterns, it'll just add to their existing ranks. Now, jumping back to Earth, because I know you guys are really interested in Earth, the Black Lantern Justice League versus all these different superheroes, or at least whatever's left, is actually pretty impressive because they're all basically fighting their own personal demons. It's no accident that each of these members is being pitted against somebody who they are most familiar with. For example, when Hal Jordan became Parallax during the old Emerald Twilight stories, him facing off against Superman and defeating him has always been considered an insult to Superman himself and the rest of the superhero community. Now, a lot of this was because of the fact that Hal Jordan as Parallax was trying to obliterate the entirety of the universe, but it was still pretty cool. But Barry Allen grabbing Hal Jordan and racing a couple seconds into the future basically allows, or at least it means, these Black Lantern rings that are chasing them are basically gone, because while they are a couple seconds ahead, at the end of the day, in the present moment, right then and there, they're gone. While all this is happening, John Stewart is racing to Earth with an army of all these Black Lanterns behind him. So all these things are basically crescendoing down into this moment when everybody basically coalesces on Earth. Everybody shows up on Earth, and it's this massive final battle. The other half of this is that while these leaders of the various Lantern Corps are able to face off against some of these threats, at the end of the day, the number of Black Lanterns there are almost overwhelming. There's millions of them. And so in response to this, Ganthid, one of the Guardians of the Universe, one of the guys who helped to create the Green Lantern Corps, comes along and basically says, I'm making myself a Green Lantern. Not only that, because of the fact that almost all the rings are basically built on the very nature of the Lantern rings themselves, the Green Lantern rings, in the sense of how they're designed, how they're programmed, what this means is that each member, each one of these guys can basically create a deputy of sorts. The ring can duplicate itself and then go out and find a host. What this does is it allows for a temporary bolstering of numbers. We end up seeing these rings race off and pick some amazing hosts. The first one that gets picked is Lex Luthor, and it's the coolest thing ever because while all this is going on, Lex Luthor met with an orange ring of avarice. He becomes an orange lantern. Scarecrow becomes a yellow lantern. Barry Allen, a blue lantern, so on and so forth. It's one of the coolest things ever. We get to see characters as various members of the Lantern Corps that we would normally never see in this particular scenario. And that's why it's so interesting, is because Blackest Night was designed to be this massive story that was huge in scope. But one of the first things that people started asking when we saw these introductions of these different Lantern Corps is, well, what would happen if Superman became like a Red Lantern? Or what would happen if like Wonder Woman became like a Star Sapphire? That's the way this plays out, is because it's basically giving fans their heart's desires. Here's what you want to see. Characters who would never have a lantern ring suddenly get one, and then what would they be like? Now, of course, in the middle of all this, we transition basically out to what's left of the Green Lantern Corps, to Kyle Rayner, to Saranic Natu, the daughter of Sinestro, all these different things. Now, remember, in the last video, we talked about how Kyle Rayner had basically died, how Kyle Rayner as a Green Lantern was believed to have been dead. It took the combined efforts of one of the Star Sapphires Sapphires, the Lantern Tribe of Love, to grab Saranac Natu, the daughter of Sinestro, who Kyle Rayner, I guess who was in love with Kyle Rayner, to basically tether that life force and bring back Kyle Rayner, to effectively sort of resurrect him. The problem with this is that in that moment when Kyle Rayner was dead, Guy Gardner of Earth lost it. Now here's a funny thing. Man, I love Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner fans are relatively small. I mean, it's not the biggest fan base out there, but by God, they are hardcore. They love Guy Gardner. And understandably so, because Guy Gardner is like the guy you want in your corner. When the world's going to pot, when it's all going down, if I'm somebody and I'm like, okay, who am I gonna pick to be my Green Lantern and who do I want in my corner? Guy Gardner, because he will fight until he dies. Like he's just, he is so awesome and he's so badass. But the guy's a former cop, you know, basically become a Green Lantern. So like, he's a no-nonsense guy. In the scenario, when he lost his mind, he was suddenly bonded with a Red Lantern ring. Now remember, when it comes to the Red Lanterns, you don't get to choose to become one. When you get so full of rage and so full of wrath, the Red Lantern ring just shows up to you and says, you have great rage in your heart, you belong to the Red Lantern Corps, and just forces itself onto you. But this is important because when a person becomes a Red Lantern, their heart basically gets replaced by the Red Lantern ring, which means to say the Red Lantern ring becomes their heart. Their blood gets replaced with plasma. If Kyle Rayner or somebody were to walk up and just take the Red Lantern ring off of Guy Gardner, it would kill him. His heart would basically cease to exist. His body would shut down, and that would be the end of him. And so this is basically a conflict on two fronts. Is Kyle Rayner and Saranac Natu and the Green Lantern Corps trying to face off against the Black Lanterns, while at the same time trying to find a way to bring Guy Gardner back. Now, none of it really matters anyway, because Guy Gardner as a Red Lantern is wrecking the Black Lanterns. It is one of the coolest things to see because, dude, the guy loses his, man, look at this upcoming action right here. The guy loses his mind on these Black Lanterns. Like, they're doing what they can, but it doesn't matter, man. Guy Gardner freaks out and says, come feel me. It's one of the coolest things ever to see his character freak out like this because he's just a force of nature. Like he's just wrecking through every last one of these Black Lanterns. Not enough that he's destroying them in their entirety and reducing their number by a huge portion, but certainly enough that the Black Lanterns are starting to get a little concerned. Now, in the middle of all this, we're met with the arrival of Mogo, basically this planet that received a Green Lantern ring. Now, Mogo is one of the most powerful Green Lanterns out there just because of the fact that he's able to put out a massive amount of power because of his size. But Mogo is also like this secondary base of operations. Because he's a planet, should Oa, the home base of the Green Lanterns and the Guardians of the Universe, should it ever be destroyed, Mogo would become their base of operations. We saw that in the New 52. But what Mogo also says is that in this moment right now, there is a protocol that was devised by the Guardians of the Universe that was given to Mogo. Should Oa ever become overrun, the idea of Mogo is to implement what's called a purge, to effectively purge those who are intruding. In this instance, it's the Black Lanterns. And so what Mogo does is basically increase his own gravitational pull and then grab every single thing within his immediate vicinity on Oa and drag it directly to where he's at. And it brings them all down to the surface of his own planet. What he does is he basically grabs these Black Lanterns and starts pulling them down into his own core, which is superheated like the core of any planet, and then basically just starts atomizing them. So sure, I guess their rings are there, but their physical bodies are destroyed, and the rings are useless without a physical body. And so where the day is won, so to speak, for a temporary moment, what we end up still having is Guy Gardner as a Red Lantern. And so the question becomes, how do you fix him? How do you fix a guy who's a Red Lantern? The only way to really fix a Red Lantern, quote unquote, is to basically have a Blue Lantern show up and cleanse their body of the red impurity and then allow the removal of a ring. If a Blue Lantern's not there doesn't seem to be a legit conceivable way in order to save Guy Gardner. But there is a way to keep him alive, and we'll find out in the next video. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.